So 3 artists and a publisher walk into a museum. It's a joke, I think, but more likely it's about your opportunity to listen and learn about the brilliance of collaboration that can go on between artists, a publisher, a workshop, ideas. It's a phenomenon when you can see it realized in such a way. When you get an opportunity to see the exhibition upstairs, you will find that our discussion tonight will have some real resonance because you'll see the results of what we'll be talking about. So welcome this evening. Did you have a comment you wanted to make, Jack?
Do you want me to make a comment?
Please do.
Okay. Actually, this afternoon I got a message from a really good friend of mine, and this is basically all I'm going to say. They're going to have to do the talking. So he said, talk low, talk slow, and don't say too much. That's it.
That'll fit. That'll work. So we do have a slide sort of accompaniment to our conversation this evening. So is there a first slide that you'd like us to sort of consider?
Sure, I have slides of all of the additions that are in the exhibition, so I
Okay.
can show these.
Excellent. So following alphabetical order, speaking with Lesley about the projects that she did with Landfall Press, as I recall, Landfall was the first time you ever had made editions.
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
What?
So, but he was the first real printmaker that I worked with. But what I want to say about, maybe want to say, when someone says yes to your work, when you're an artist and someone says yes to your work, when you're an artist and you have doubts and hopes and dreams inside of yourself, and someone says yes to you, there is a bond of trust that starts right away. And Jack, when I came back from India, I started painting words on my friends' bodies as language, as if the words that we hold inside ourselves are continually staining through from the inside of our bodies to the outside. Now, no one else who was working with my work at the time liked these photos at all. And so I had tea with Jack one day when he was in New York. I said, Jack, what do you think of these? He said, okay, so you're going to come out. So he said yes, and that really means a lot. Thank you, Jack.
So by saying yes, obviously it means that you would start a project, and you've made so many other projects over the years, so the relationships continued and the collaborative spirit between Jack and this affirmative thing that you've talked about. Are there other projects? We're looking at the project that is just one of my favorite pieces. It's up in the exhibition, and you'll see it in its full regalia, and you'll understand how materials and print, people think of print as being something that's maybe flat, that it just is this two-dimensional thing, and in fact at Landfall that is probably the antithesis of what's made, what's thought about, the ideas that are tossed about to come up with something as magnificent as this particular print. So is there another project that you did at Landfall that you feel is moved beyond the initial ideas of what you had come in the door with as a result of a collaborative relationship with Jack and the printers?
All the projects that I did with Jack and Steve and Barb and Chris at Landfall Press exceeded anything I dreamed of. And let me be frank. Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote in his book, Love in the Time of Cholera, that there are two kinds of love. There's the love of blood, and there's the love of salt. The love of salt is the bond that happens between people that work together. And it's a kind of a deep trust. Jack and I have that kind of deep trust. In fact, we have it so much that he doesn't really even need me to make the artwork. He comes up with ideas for my work himself. So I just want to say that working together with this man has been really wonderful for me and my life, and that it is about love as much as work.
That's a fantastic comment. And so in the context of understanding the relationship that you two share creatively, I was wondering if we're going to go in alphabetical order. If James, if you could give us some perspective. I don't know if we're...
I don't love Jack. So
That's good.
Wow, okay.
I agree with Lesley about trust. And earlier this evening, we were in the gallery looking at the show, and I mentioned to Tom, I said, there's no other printmaker, probably no other person, not just in the United States, but in the world, that would have tackled a print that's up there. And Jack didn't quibble, he immediately said yes, which kind of surprised me. Because it was physically very demanding, emotionally demanding, I think intellectually demanding. And I really do enjoy working with Jack because somehow I can say, Jack, what about a color blue? He knows immediately what I seem to be thinking. And I think that collaboration between artist and printmaker is what really makes great prints. If you have it too one-sided, if you have the artist domineering everything, or if you have the printmaker domineering everything, then what you get is maybe not a very good print. But all artists, I think they just feel comfortable. They feel like this is a work environment where everyone understands everyone else.
So my question would be saying yes, we have understood that the artists do. Was the scale of the work something that you came to the shop with, or did it sort of evolve into that scale?
No, I've done lots of, that's actually probably smaller than the piece really is.
Right.
And I've done a lot of really large, I don't know, maybe you have a slide of some of the other stuff that are drawn. Well, no, that's working, but anyway. Yeah, there's a drawing. So that drawing, and I always kind of, when you say, oh, this drawing is this large and this, scale is very important to me, especially in the context of drawing and printmaking, because most of the time people think of drawings and prints about this big. Probably because you can buy a pad that's 18 by 24 or whatever. And so it's sort of locked in their mind that this is what you do when you do a drawing, or this is what you do when you do a print. I think approaching it from a scale perspective is very interesting to me for a few reasons. One of them is because the physicality of just making the print or drawing, the energy that it takes up and down a ladder or whatever all day long is part of the piece as well. I'll tell a brief story just real quickly about scale. I was going to have a show at a gallery in Chicago about 15 years ago. Rona, Rona Hoffman. I'm sure everybody knows Rona Hoffman. So she called up and she said, James, I want to show that drawing, City of Tales. And I said, okay, great. And I said, send me the dimensions of the gallery. And she said, okay. So she sent the dimensions, and I said, well, Rona, it doesn't fit. Your ceilings are 11 feet or 11 and a half feet, and the longest wall you have is 28 feet. And she kept arguing, saying, oh, yes, it will. And so finally her last statement was, James, I just don't understand why you don't want to show at the gallery. because it was so locked in, and I think a lot of people are this way. And she's been around art her whole life, locked into the idea that drawings or prints have to be a certain size. Not necessarily.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the scale of the idea sometimes determines the scale of the project. If you're making a print or, the limitations of what the print shop can do. But in the case of Landfall, I've always noticed that there's this interest in going beyond certain restrictions that the press or the
Absolutely.
process might have. And I think you're a perfect example of an artist who takes
And
advantage of that.
I do want to clarify one thing. That doesn't mean that, all large things are automatically interesting. That doesn't mean that at all. What it does mean is that's what I'm interested in.
Well, I think too, when you go upstairs, you'll see that the piece has a very theatrical, the edition, The Feast of Four Rivers, has this very theatrical and sort of life-size feel to it. And I think it's interesting that, there aren't that many prints that I can recall that kind of bring you into the space and make you part of the environment and really take you into the story that you're trying to tell. And one of the things that I'm very interested in about being here with the three of you is that you're always telling stories. And one of Jack's great passions with publishing is to tell stories. So if any of you'd like to jump in and speak about, I know Lesley, you gave us some reference with the first pieces. James, Peregrine, the stories that you tell with the work and the kind of vision that you have for the way that you assemble things. Is there a way that you can give us some insight how you first came to work with Jack on the project, the doilies?
Yeah, I think I was 19 or 20. And the woman who was a fine arts buyer for Hallmark saw my work in a zine, like an independent publication that was brought to New York for an art fair. And so she saw the work and she contacted a couple of people. I ran into her at a gallery in Kansas City. And so pretty quickly afterwards, I got a studio visit from Jack Lemmon and Bob Carlson. And Bob was amazing. He was this big, beautiful, effervescent, kind of manic creative friend of ours. And I was living in this 5,000 square foot space that was $500 a month. And I was making all of this delicate work. And I remember the light coming in and like what Lesley is saying, that feeling of yes. He saw these little lunch bags that I had done an alphabet about and these lace doilies that I had sort of navigated, sort of this space between language and image making. And just to be doing something that was so important to me and then have a stranger confirm that it was important to not just me, it's freedom. It's a form of freedom. And I've seen you give this freedom to all walks of life. And everybody's freedom, it's like love. It's different. But there is a direct correlation between blood and salt and love and fearlessness.
So with the particular piece that we're looking at right now, it was obviously something kind of out of the box in terms of what, again, as we said, what one expects to see as a print. And Landfall and Jack's embrace of different surfaces, different materials, different ways of printing, I think there are examples in all the artists' work that are just the paradigm of this particular approach. And so with something like the Obey and Overbay and then the piece Pyre that you had done, the most recent work, which is also on view upstairs, it has an absolutely brilliant story and a history work of art. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
With a lot of the stories that I'm now in my 4th decade, so I can say that I can look back and say that the work that I was doing with Jack was work that I was looking back on myself and the women around me as young women. And then I've done a lot of really fun, more sexual pinup work with Landfall, and then with Pyre, I'd gone to the Tenement Museum in New York and just had a sense of the economics of life. And I had worked on these small vehicles, these small platforms for my work, and I said, like, hey, I sent them in advance, like, just on regular paper hangers. What do you guys think about these? And so just to see the process of them designing something as simple as a paper hanger out of archival paper. With Ovabat, it was easy because, not easy, but the paper was already archival. So even though I bought them from a party shop, we were able to get to work really quickly. And I hand colored everything. So, I mean, I was a little bit low maintenance, right? Just hand coloring. With Pyre, it's just being able to make something that's a narrative and a book that's both accessible and also allows the person who is experiencing it to feel that they're in a private space is kind of a goal with my work.
And if you could talk just a bit about the subject, Pyre, and the bit of history that it meant to commemorate, I don't know if that's the proper word, to memorialize is probably more appropriate. And so if you could give them just a little bit of sense of what we're looking at here as a work of art.
So Pyre is based on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. It was March 25th of 1911, and they had these young women working in these factories, and they were unregulated. Children were working in the factories. Also, there were bins of fabric so that if there were children that were working in the factory, they could hide the kids so that the inspectors wouldn't see. And 146 people were killed, mostly women, mostly Jewish girls on a Saturday. Some families had multiple daughters. And somebody was smoking, they think, and it caught a bin on fire. And it was the 8th and 10th floor that all of these women were trapped and were jumping out of the building, trying to escape. It changed a lot of labor laws, because it was so tragic. And I thought how important it would be to alphabetize them. It's 26 of the girls, and lucky for me, I suppose, they're in alphabetical order, so that made it, easy to pick the names, and they're a rhyming couplet, and I can read it to you. I have it, and maybe I will. It's to return the work back to something that might have been in that space was really important, and also to have the freedom to work with Jack and Steve. Thank you. I can read this really quickly.
Please do.
Okay. A is for ash, B is for building, C are the ashes Celine left on the ceiling. Della yelled out, but the smoke made her mute. Essie broke her back down the elevator chute. F is for Frida, whose legs were too long. G is for Gussie, whose rings were all gone. Little Miss Hannah didn't know what to do. Ignatia's father knew her one shoe. Josie and Jenna could barely be seen. Kate and Sarah were only 14. L is for Lucia, fists on the door. The 3 Maltese women couldn't breathe anymore. Sadie Nussbaum up in flames to her core. Julia Oberstein closed her eyes. Pauline touched her lips and began to cry. Quick as a rabbit, Rebecca jumped. Sophie was quiet. Tessie was stumped. Mary Ulo, so pretty and wise. V is for Violet, who burned her thighs. Dora Wolfowitz was 21. X is the spot where they found my son. Y is for Yetta, head over heels. Z is for Zelda, caught in the wheels. So if you were to go through, that's what you would read with small stories from every woman that I collected from the history of the tragedy.
Well, to continue on with the theme, the value of a narrative, and in the instance of all 3 of the artists here, their interest in poetry and in literature, I think, is something we need to remark about, because each one of them has this very deep connection to music, to literature, to poetry, and I wonder if any of you would like to speak about that, and very much in the way that Peregrine has done.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, so you were an English major in school and you became a visual artist. And so much of your art is a hybrid of a visual statement. And in a way you kind of, when I look at your work, I can kind of verbalize as I'm reading it with my eyes. I'm reading it and internalizing it as a part of language. And I wonder if you could talk about how that evolved for you in having the two disciplines come together like that.
For me, we all are animals of language. All the words that were and all the words that will be lie sleeping inside our bodies. So for me, there has to be both, the body and the word. But more to the point, I am not a writer. I am a word thief. So I steal the words of the poets that I work with. And over the years, people have said to me, Lesley, you are fairly articulate as a speaker. Don't you think you could find some of your own language to write? So I went in my studio, and I sat, and I tried to make something poetic come up out of my body and into my mind and wake me up. But it didn't happen, and it never happened. But what does happen is when I read certain language of certain poets, something happens to me. Something happens to me that is like a flash of truth, where the words know more what they mean than I do. And that jumps into my eyes and down into my body, and there in my body, ideas and images for art are born. It's as if I am inseminated with the words, and then the images come out fully formed, and we make art from those images.
Well, brilliant. In the instance of James's piece, that's fabulous. In the instance of James' piece, as we had talked upstairs, and the information that I have is that you'd worked on this piece for about 10 years. It had had a first version, and then when you came back to rework it, so to speak, the addition of the poetry, the language, your creation, and the inclusion of that language was really important to sort of summarizing or bringing the piece together. Is that a fair assumption?
That is, and being a visual artist, people always, I'm sure Peregrine and Lesley have all experienced this. I know I have thousands of times people say, oh, well, who have been your influences, living or dead or whatever in the visual art world? And when I really think about that, I'm much more influenced by literature, film, and music than I am visual art. Now, that's kind of a strange thing to say, but I try to incorporate some of those words or passages, and I've written some things that I started writing, 30 years ago that I never showed to not even my wife. She didn't even know I was doing this until about 4 or 5 years ago, and so I started incorporating some of the passages of things I'd written. But I want to just return to this thing about scale one more time because it deals with film. And I remember as a kid, I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and Guatemala and Central America. But when we lived in Lubbock, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's incredibly flat and there's really nothing much to do there. And they had Saturday morning films, and this was in the early 50s of and we called ourselves the Midway Mob, and it would cost a dime to go in, and then you could get popcorn and Coke for $0.25. And I remember going in the morning and being there till I left at night, and sitting in the audience in the seats in the theater and looking at Flash Gordon and Tarzan and 1,000 cartoons and all of that type of thing. And it was this huge scale, and it was film, and it was black and white, which I've still mainly do, and it had such an influence on me as a kid, combining all of those elements of music and film, music, literature and film that I didn't know how to do film, or I didn't know how to write things, but I thought I could draw things.
Well, I remember Jack telling me one of the projects that you had done was a film project that had really caught his attention, and that there was this extraordinary connection, as you say, with this experience of viewing film. And then there's a suite of prints that you did with Jack about signs, hand signs. I used to live on the El Paso Juarez border. Now it's very much in the news every day. And I noticed that there were people standing outside of the jail using not sign language for the hearing impaired, but they had invented a sign language so that they could look up and see their brothers or sisters or whoever in the jail, and they could sign to them, and they wouldn't have to go through the bureaucracy of being searched and so forth. So I did this entire, I did, I don't know, 4 or 5 videos. I did drawings, I did sculpture, I did all kinds of things called Tongue-Cut Sparrows. It was based on this visual sign language that incorporated, for me, the film language and the visual aspect of drawing. And the literature aspect was that most of the signing that the prisoners did to their loved ones on the street was, "How's my lawyer doing? How are the kids doing? Can you give me some drugs?" It was that type, what you would expect from people that were incarcerated. But I had them signing Borges and Lorca and Shakespeare and poetry. But I had them, the girls that were signing, I had them pick these passages that most exemplified their love and loss. So for me, it was this coming and melting together of music, literature, and film into one thing.
So I've been thinking this for a few minutes, and so I just want to say, James, I am really such a fan of your work. When I am, and why? Because it's good. But you know, when he talks about scale, when I first saw one of his drawings down in New Orleans, and also his work at Jack's, I just imagine, and you can correct me, I should stand up, but I won't, that he just draws like this in these big gestures, whereas I don't feel when I look at his work that he draws like this.
You're absolutely right.
So I get a feeling as an audience when I look at his work, I'm not very tall, but I get a real feeling of space and height when I look at his work in that one gesture, in that one line. Thank you for your work.
Gosh, what a nice thing to say.
Well, I also want to reference the fact that there's so much performative work that these artists also do in addition to the prints and the drawings and the works that they make. And in a way, printmaking is kind of a performative act. If any of you have ever had the opportunity to see someone print, you'll understand there's a kind of balletic situation that takes place between the printers, the artists, and looking at a print and moving, and the kind of contact that they have, and this sort of saying yes thing. I was curious to know if anyone has any observations about the actual process of collaborating in the print shop. Is there a recollection that any of you have about something that just was overwhelmingly moving or important for you to have observed in the making of your work?
To be honest, just being there, it's such a stage, and I have been part of this amazing process for 20 of the 50 years. So I'm not even halfway, but to walk into a space where there's all of this work that you've seen in publications or you've seen in these sacred spaces or museums or collections, and just to kind of have access to them on such a tactile level. Like, I would see things being made by you cut out. I would see the prints and how they were dark, and what kind did you like? Did you like it lighter or darker? And then kind of just how efficient so efficient that it felt casual, right? And so you just see the machines make the body of the people, it changes the bodies of the men, these presses. Like their arms get longer, their chests get broader. You see it if you come back in the interns and all the ways that the muscle movement changes the body within that space of Landfall Press. And so just as a younger artist, I think we're all young artists until we die. Do we die? I don't know. The idea of just things being pushed pinned to the wall, just to see something with one less layer. And it's like being part of it's the coolest club.
I would agree. In the instance of Lesley, the physicality of some of the surfaces that you create at Landfall and being involved with the printers to make the surfaces, to tone the paper, to sew things, to build things together. It's not like in Landfall things are just given over to a crew and they construct something. It's a very hands-on, very collaborative thing that I know Jack is interested in, that aspect of working with all of you. Could you speak to that?
I can. Being an artist and working with printmakers is basically a completely out of control situation. I myself know nothing about printmaking, and any printmaker that I've worked with completely prefers it to be that way. So I don't know about you, and I don't know about you, but I know that Jack and Steve totally do not want me saying, well, do you think we could do the aquatint a little more dense over in that area? So you're not really the captain of the ship. It's multiple captains of the ship. And once I was scheduled to come out and I broke my wrist. I said, Jack, I can't come out. I broke my wrist. He said, oh, just put your brain on a plane. And, we'll do the rest. So I just really want to give homage to all printmakers who really, they are artists themselves, and they bring everything to the work. We know nothing.
Also, I don't like assistants. I work alone in my studio 7 days a week, whatever. And this is one of the very few shared excitements that I experience, and maybe Peregrine and Lesley will agree, that when you're watching Jack and Steve and they're making the first proof or something, and that paper is on the press, because I know nothing about printmaking at all, really. And then when they pull that paper off the stone, it really is magic. And I'm always so astounded. And it's one of those shared excitements where I go, God, that's really unbelievable. That is just amazing. And it's a shared excitement that I've only experienced printmaking.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Jack and Steve are equally as excited to see the results come off the stone. It'd be something that you approve and continue to collaborate
It
on.
comes off the first time.
It's magic.
It's magic.
It
It's
is.
totally
Yeah,
magic.
it takes your breath away.
So those of you that go upstairs after the exhibition, you'll see a press. There's a lithography press that is a very specific type of press, of Charles Brand press that's used to print lithography, stone lithography, plate lithography, and the materials are there that they use, and they look like these very kind of arcane things up there, but they are, trust me, objects and tools that are used in Landfall Press. And so there is also this interesting historical change that has taken place at Landfall Press, where Jack Lemmon has brought into the print shop a press that comes from Paris, France, from the 1800s and the absolute heyday of French color lithography. And there's a short film that you'll see of, again, I have to refer to it as a kind of ballet in the making of this particular, or making prints on this particular press. And you'll see Jack, and you'll see the press assistants and Steve, and they're all in their position, it would be in a way like going into a very good Escoffier kitchen. You're seeing all of them with their particular job, their particular position, and their know-how put to maximum use. And I know that you've had the opportunity to have an edition printed on that press. I wonder if you could talk about watching that.
It's like insane. Like,
Science fiction
I
almost.
know.
You'll
Like
see the film.
Bauhaus meets the ballet or something. And yeah, everybody was really excited. And similar to the dealer, to Rona, like I could imagine the size, sort of, how big. Chris was like, it's so crazy, it's so big. And then I started getting these photographs, and it's like you had moved a submarine into Landfall Press. And so, it looked like some kind of war object. And somebody brought in somebody came in from the Marines, I think, to adjust everything. It was just like so intricate and so specialized. And I printed a piece. It was a pinup calendar, and we even attached a calendar to it. It was a girl who had polio, and so it's very sort of seductive and very antiquated looking, but it's also it was very perfect for that press. It felt like the right space for it
Right.
to be born of.
Well, I think it's important here. I mean, I would certainly like to have Jack speak about it, but I'll preface hopefully a couple comments that he'll make, in that the inclusion of this particular object at Landfall Press is not just some sort of interesting object to bring into the workshop. It actually has to do with the quality of the impression that comes off of this press. So there is this contrast between the press that's upstairs, the hand lithography press, and the quality of the impression that comes off of this press.
I'm going to say one really quick thing.
Yeah.
It kind of gives you faith in the future, right? Like you look at this thing and it's like, oh, if we could have created that then we have so much more to do. It's going to be okay. So yeah, that's my other thought about that.
Excellent. Well, just to continue on a little bit, the collection that's here at the Museum of French Posters by Jules Cheret was printed on a press exactly like that. And I know from conversations with Jack that you've always been obsessed with a particular surface that's come off of these presses that are on these prints, Lautrec, Vuillard, Bonnard, Cheret. And if you're comfortable talking about it, the moment when that press was operational, I wanted you to give us a sense of your feelings about seeing this in your shop finally, making an impression, and holding, as they've all said, that first print that comes off that press. Is there a way to describe that?
Speechless.
Speechless. And I think all of us are that have seen an impression come off of this press. It is the quality of the print, the efficiency of the machine just gives you, as Peregrine has said, a sense of what technology can be. But it's not technology in any other way than it's been designed. It functions through a motor, but all its parts, everything is made by hand, and it creates a really specific kind of impression for a printer.
Also, I might have this wrong, but I think Jack told me he's not going to say anything, so maybe I can just go ahead and say this.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know, it's hard to shut him up. It's
Jack,
really-
you're dominating
I
this
mean,
whole thing.
I heard what he said. I was trying to channel it.
That this press came out of the same shop where possibly Toulouse-Lautrec had made prints. Well, if you're standing there and you're an artist and you're making prints, and that happens to shoot through your heart and mind, and you go, God, I'm working on the same press that Toulouse-Lautrec did. I mean, could it get any cooler than that, really? I mean, making prints, could it be any better than that?
Well, there's a particular project of yours that actually came to life as a result of this press, the Whispers portfolio. I was hoping that you could talk to us a bit about that.
Oh, well, I didn't know they were going to show this.
Well, surprise.
ought to be like Jack and not say anything. Well, this has some of my, I used to just call it text, but now I've given in and call it poetry. So I've included some of the poetry with images, and we printed it on that press.
Well, my understanding was that there was a particular quality to the print that you were searching for.
Yeah, I wanted this sort of very faint, it was there, it wasn't there, this ethereal, spiritual sort of these, the very, very, very light and mystical and mysterious and like a whisper. And when I mentioned that to Jack, immediately, this is why Jack and I think we worked good. He knew immediately what I was talking about. He said, oh, we'll just add this, we'll do this, we'll do that. And that's what happened.
Well, I think it's important to also mention the fact that Jack has said to me on several occasions that the hand press could not get the quality of impression that the French press has. So in some instances, it is specific for a particular project. In the
Yeah,
case,
Jack chose to use the,
Right.
Absolutely, he was the one that chose that.
So, Lesley, working with the idea of print, and I've seen so many wonderful performative things that you've done that include printed works or include objects that reference printed projects that you've done at Landfall and elsewhere. Could you talk a bit about how that influence and that sort of overlap is it the result of working in print, or is it just an extension of the experience of making print?
I'm going to say something, and I don't know if it's an answer to your question.
Okay.
Okay. So, the other thing that affected me in India was that I was in India in the 1990s, and all my sculptor women friends in New York wore tight jeans and tight black t-shirts and work boots. But when I moved to India, all my women friends, lawyers, doctors, important women, they all dressed. They wore saris, they wore salwar kameezes, they wore skirts. So it changed my mind as to the power of the dress. And after India, I started to associate dresses with a kind of feminist femininity. And actually, I won't stand up, but to this day, I myself do not ever wear pants. I only wear dresses in homage to what I learned about being a feminine feminist. And who would have thought that Jack also, I don't know, yes, I can say that would become a feminine feminist. So Jack, people don't really believe this story, but he was sitting cross-legged in my studio, and we were sewing these little teeny tiny dresses together. So there we are. And I will say, because as we know, again, Jack is being so overly talkative tonight, that when you're in a shop, when you're working with the leader of the team, that person has a big presence. And when that paper comes off and it's pinned to the wall, as you said, and the leader of your team goes, no. You go, oh, okay. And then you work harder. And then you work for that yes from the leader of your team and the other teammates that you have together. It's something of a unanimous decision usually.
Well, it reminds me of a particular quote from the artist Ed Ruscha, where he said that, really good art for him can be either, huh? Wow. As opposed to, wow, huh? And I think so much of what the three of you have done, certainly almost everything that Jack Lemon has done at Landfall Press, has this impact. You are taken in by its visual power, you're taken in by its accomplished production qualities, and then these layers of meaning these layers, and we've talked about them tonight, start to appear. And I think that's it's a real hallmark, it's a real marker for a collaborative situation where you can have the production meet the quality of the idea and collaborate to come up with a much more complete work of art as a result of that. And I wondered if any of you had any thoughts about how, in your experience, when those moments were, if there's a particular work that you feel has that power that you just did not expect, and it was wow.
My first piece with Jack basically put me on the map academically, and I hadn't even had a solo show. So I tuned into the people around me, to Steve, and every time you go into Landfall, it's a different season, and of not weather-wise, but just the energy, and just to tune into this piece and to submit. I mean, there's a level of like submission to yourself, to submission to that there's an end to this, and there's a vision to this, and all of these people are truly there to assist you in that vision is incredible. And that first piece for me just made me have not like laurels to rest on, but you know, I still am in those museums. They can't take that away from me. And to have somebody help me make my work and also advocate for me in a public space, I mean, we're all talking to you because he's advocated for not just our work, but our work habit and also our ability not to embarrass him in public. So, so far, so good.
So in the instance of the Well of Souls, that first project that you did with Jack, I look at that and I think about how there was clearly this intention to interpret your drawing style and the materials that you used. And was that something that you felt brought to you this particular sort of epiphany of like, my God, they can make this surface for me that I wasn't capable of doing?
I think Lesley said you wanted to say something, Jack?
I'm going to say something.
Good.
I've actually worked with hundreds of artists over the 50 years. And of course, I chose these because they actually like me. But they're up on the wall, and there are artists that hate my guts. But still, I have so much respect for the artist. It doesn't make any difference if they hate me. I can still work with them. And I always would work with them, even though they might not want me to. But that's just kind of the kind of relations I think Landfall has always had with the artists that have come there.
Well, it's about the art, isn't it? And it's about what together you can accomplish, the personalities or whatever issues that may exist. The objective is to come up with a work of art that distinguishes itself from other works they've made. It's not a competitive situation amongst Landfall artists. That's another thing I want to make clear, is that each project is approached with its own integrity and with its own space. I think Peregrine, all the artists, James, Lesley have spoke about it. That's a really unique feature of Landfall Press, is that there is, I wouldn't say a clean slate, but there is this moment where everything changes. And I think you're right by saying that the seasons are constantly changing and evolving at Landfall. And each time a project comes in there, and because of my collaboration with Jack and on the show and on the book, I've been able to witness it. And it's one of the most astounding things, and I can't imagine what it must be like for an artist to be able to feel that generosity and that spirit of collaboration. Thank you, Jack, for that insight. I think that's really an important thing for you all to understand. So I don't know how we are on time, or if you're... Okay. Yeah. Excellent. If there are questions, if anybody has some questions that either address the show or any of us, please. Okay. Please do, yeah.
Oh, one.
Do we have, yes, please.
When I saw fire, I immediately saw it as a book, even though it's so abstracted. I'm wondering, Landfall has pushed the boundaries of what is a print, but if any of you worked with the book, and what is a book? Is that something that you consider?
Yeah,
I've made 2 books.
I can't hear.
You mean artist books?
Artist books.
have we explored the idea of a book?
It's how a book for Landfall is not necessarily a book. It's a series of idea pages that are bound by the idea. And so, speaking about power, I think that's something Peregrine should address.
It's a hard piece to curate, and it's fun to also see it in different spaces. It would be nice to figure out a way for people to see it or have more access, or it to have, it's hard. It's a lot of my work is difficult to display, and so for it's an alphabet. There is connotations for children's books and Edward Gorey and all those sorts of familiar things. Mostly, I just use the idea of a book as material. I don't really think about my work in the context of books. Does that answer your question? All right,
Okay.
great.
Anyone else? Thank you so much for all your attention, and by all means. Oh, I'm very sorry. Yes, sir.
I just had a question about how do you take a piece of printed art to explain the process and make it three-dimensional?
Scissors. How do you make a piece of artwork three-dimensional?
How do I make what?
paper. You should talk about your
Yes, Lesley has
the dress piece.
insight.
Peregrine's right. How do you make a 2-dimensional piece of work 3-dimensional? You cut it out, you sew it together, you glue it, you staple it, you hang it up. There you go.
That's it right there. I mean, not to be
no
flip, but
sarcasm. I mean,
in
that
a way,
really-
yeah.
It's like art is the ability to turn material into thought. So that's your material. And with these tools, you turn it into something else. It just, the process makes it dimensional from nothing.
But I'm curious, was your question about the actual process of printing, or was it just the conceptual approach to going from 2 dimensions to 3?
I think it's more conceptual, but are there different printing techniques that you do to go from?
I can't hear.
Well, it's kind of like being a first-chair violinist. You have skills, you have a position, and you know what you can achieve in a composition. And so an artist comes into a print shop like Landfall, and there is a challenge to do something, to make something, and to realize an idea. And it could be 3-dimensional, it could be 2-dimensional, it could just be a magazine, it could be a film. It takes all kinds of forms. But the notion that it's 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional is just a kind of reality check. And I think with all the artists that are here, their ideas go way beyond the surface, go way beyond the object. And if you allow yourself to really look at the work and then afterwards investigate the rest of the artist's work, you'll understand they're not really that isolated, but they are singular objects. So conceptually, I think there's a little work that the viewer needs to do to kind of complete the idea for the artist and for the notion of making an addition.
It's a really good question, but it's a huge question that we could spend hours talking about. So what I would suggest, there are many great print shops within a drive of this beautiful city. I would suggest everybody find a print shop and go to it and visit, and then you will learn the answer to your question.
Brilliant.
Bring whiskey.
Very good.
Thank you, Lesley.
I have a question for the audience.
Oh,
What?
we're just going to
Yeah, I
talk
do.
amongst ourselves here.
I would like to know how many artists / printmakers are in the audience.
Show of hands. Well, there we go. Gives us hope.
Gives us hope.
Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your attention.